Good morning and happy Monday to everyone. Hope that you enjoyed a great weekend as we have made it into another work week. And we're thankful for your time spent with us today as we're reading together in God's Word. Our text up for today on the schedule for our daily Bible reading in 2022 is going to be in Isaiah 24 and also Luke chapter 6. So if you have a Bible, I invite you to open that up to Isaiah 24. We'll be reading that together in just a second. And then following that, a few comments, we'll be looking in Luke chapter 6, or just feel free to follow along here on your phone, your tablet, or computer screen, as I will have the text pulled up on the screen as well. In case anybody was wondering, I like to use Olive Tree is the app that I use for any kind of text online, as far as an app goes, or BibleGateway.com is a great resource as well. But Olive Tree, I just like the layout of it. It's easy to read from. And so that's why I'm using that for this reading this year together with you. So let me go ahead and throw that text up onto the screen. We're looking in Isaiah 24 and verse number 1, reading from the Christian Standard Bible, Isaiah chapter 24 and verse number 1. We are entering into a new section of Isaiah's writing. Sections 13 through 23 was a section that focused on these individual nations and the punishments that would be rendered against them for their various levels of rebellion against God. Unfortunately, Judah and Israel were also included in those sections. But now we shift, beginning here in verse 24 and going through, in chapter 24 and going through chapter 27, we shift to God's judgment on the earth as a whole. Some have referred to this as the Isaiah apocalypse, because this is God's judgment on everything and on everyone. God's holiness within these chapters is challenged, and his justice must be seen through punishment against the nations who rebel against his holiness. The word earth, or the earth, is addressed 23 times throughout these next 4 chapters. We might also note that there's a contrast that's going to be seen between this chapter 24 and what we're going to see in chapter 25, between 2 opposing cities, one being the city representative of the earth and the other city being representative of God's kingdom. And there's the choice that we're going to have: which city will we reside in, which city will we be a resident of. And there's just timeless application within these chapters, just reminders of God's power and the fact that there is no power truly apart from God's, and that we need to make sure we are respecting that power and showing that respect through obedience to him and submitting to his will in all things. So with that said, let's get into this text of Isaiah chapter 24 and verse number 1. Look, the Lord is stripping the earth bare and making it desolate. He will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants, people and priest alike, servant and master, female servant and mistress, buyer and seller, lender and borrower, creditor and debtor. The earth will be stripped completely bare and will be totally plundered, for the Lord has spoken this message. The earth mourns and withers, and the world wastes away and withers. The exalted people of the earth waste away. The earth is polluted by its inhabitants, for they have transgressed teachings, overstepped decrees, and broken the permanent covenant. Therefore, a curse has consumed the earth, and its inhabitants have become guilty. The earth's inhabitants have burned, and only a few survive. The new wine mourns, and the new vine mourns, and the vine withers. All the carousers now groan. The joyful tambourines have ceased, and the noise of the jubilant has stopped. The joyful lyre has ceased, and they no longer sing and drink wine. Beer is bitter to those who drink it. The city of chaos is shattered. Every house is closed to entry. In the streets they cry for wine. All joy grows dark, and earth's rejoicing goes into exile. Only a desolation remains in the city. Its gate has collapsed. It's in ruins. For this is how it will be on the earth, among the nations, like a harvested olive tree, like a gleaning from a grape harvest. They raise their voices, they sing out, they proclaim in the west the majesty of the Lord. Therefore, in the east, honor the Lord. In the coast and the inlands of the west, honor the name of the Lord, the King, the God of Israel. From the ends of the earth we hear songs, the splendor of the righteous one. But I said, I waste away, woe is me. The treacherous act treacherously, the treacherous deal very treacherously. Panic, pit, and trap await you who dwell on the earth. Whoever flees at the sound of panic will fall into a pit, and whoever escapes from the pit will be caught in a trap. For the floodgates on high are opened, and the foundations of the earth are shaken. The earth is completely devastated. The earth is split open. The earth is violently shaking. The earth staggers like a drunkard and sways like a hut. Earth's rebellion weighs it down, and it falls, never to rise again. On that day, the Lord will punish the army of the heights in the heights, and the kings of the ground on the ground. They will gather together like prisoners in a pit. They will be confined to a dungeon. After many days, they will be punished. The moon will be put to shame, and the sun disgraced, because the Lord of armies will reign as king on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and he will display his glory in the presence of his elders. Again, a very devastating language is present here within this chapter. The punishment specifically mentioned in verses 4 through 13 is extremely descriptive of what's going to happen. The punishment is a result of verse number 5, that humans have just polluted everything about God's creation. They've transgressed teachings. They've overstepped decrees. They've broken the permanent covenant. It reminds me a lot of Romans chapter 1 and verse 18 through 32, that they have not been the type of people that God has created his people to be, which is a people who reflect his image and who are his representatives on this creation. Therefore, there's a curse that's going to consume the earth. There's going to be people burn. The vine is going to wither. The jubilation is going to stop. The joyful music is going to cease. Everything is going to come crashing down. And again, I want to note verse number 10: the city of chaos is shattered, and that's going to be contrasted with what we see. I believe mentioned a little bit in 3, talking about Mount Zion in Jerusalem, that being God's city. That is what it ought to be. Not necessarily speaking of Jerusalem in the sense of the historical Jerusalem at this time, but just the ideal of Jerusalem, God's city, where God's people dwell and God's people do what they ought to do. We'll see that spoken about more in verses 6 through 8 in the next chapter that we're going to read tomorrow, which is a lot of the rehashing of what we saw back in Isaiah chapter 2. But don't want to speak too much on that right now. Just let's notice that no one is going to escape God's judgment in this. Again, we have this language of the whole earth is going to be punished. No one is going to escape. Everyone is going to feel this. The earth is completely devastated. The earth is violently shaking. God's punishment is going to take place against the whole earth and all who rebel. And this is the prophet's terror, as explained in verse 16. As he's screaming, as he's crying out, I waste away, woe is me. The thought of this being a reality is just painful for Isaiah. And it's painful for Isaiah not just because of the punishment that's going to take place, but what brought upon the punishments, which again is rebellion, what we see in verse number 5, transgressing teachings, overstepping decrees, breaking the permanent covenant. So Isaiah 24, definitely not the brightest of outlooks as far as chapters go, not the happiest or best of chapters from our perspective of mankind, and yet it is a reality, and it's another reminder that when we rebel, God will hold accountable. When we rebel, God will punish, and he will bring down those who have tried to stand against him. So that's Isaiah 24, opening chapter of this section, 24 through 27, where God judges the earth, where this is Isaiah's apocalypse. And though it is difficult to read because of the reality of the situation, it is necessary as a warning for us that we not fall into the same pattern of behavior that will lead to our own punishment and destruction in the end. All right, let's look at Luke chapter 6 now. Luke chapter 6, moving along in Jesus's ministry, as we're going to see today, him choosing the 12 apostles, and we're also going to see him. We're also going to see of the Sermon on the Mount, which is not in as great of detail as we see in Matthew's account, but it is an account nonetheless of this good and strong teaching. All right, let's see here. Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6, beginning of verse 1, again reading from the Christian Standard Bible. On the Sabbath, he being Jesus passed through the grain fields. His disciples were picking heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eating them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Haven't you read what David and those who were with him did when he was hungry, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat? He even gave some of those who were with he even gave some to those who were with him. And then he told them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. A man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The scribes and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so that they could find a charge against him. But he knew their thoughts and told the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand here." So he got up and stood there. And then Jesus said to him, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" After looking around at them, he told him, "Stretch out your hand." He did, and his hand was restored. They, and this is referencing in verse 7, the scribes and the Pharisees, they, however, were filled with rage and started discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus. During those days, he went out to the mountain to pray and spent all night in prayer to God. When daylight came, he summoned his disciples, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles: Simon, who he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. After coming down with them, he stood on a level place with a large crowd of his disciples and a great number of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and from the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those torments of unclean spirits were made well. The whole crowd was trying to touch him because power was coming out from him and healing them. And now we have Jesus's Sermon on the Mount as detailed by Luke. Verse number 20, then looking up of Luke chapter 6, verse 20, then looking up at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, because the kingdom of God is yours. Blessed are you who are hungry now, because you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, because you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, insult you, and slander your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy. Take note, your reward is great in heaven, for this is the way their ancestors used to treat the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your comfort. Woe to you who are now full, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are now laughing, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when people speak well of you, for this is the way their ancestors used to treat the false prophets. But I say to you who listen, love your enemies. Do what is good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If anyone hits you on the cheek, offer the other also. And if anyone takes away your coat, don't hold back your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks you. And from someone who takes your things, don't ask for them back. Just as you want others to do for you, do the same for them. If you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? Even the sinners love those who love them. If you do what is good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do what is good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is gracious to the ungrateful and evil. Be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use it will be measured back to you. He also told them a parable. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his master or above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take the splinter that is in your eye, when you yourself don't see the beam of wood in your eye? Hypocrites, first take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinters, to take out the splinters in your brother's eye. A good tree doesn't produce bad fruits. On the other hand, a bad tree doesn't produce good fruits. For each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs aren't gathered from thorn bushes, or grapes picked from a bramble bush. A good person produces good out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil person produces evil out of the evil stored up in his heart. For his mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. When the flood came, the river crashed against that house and couldn't shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The river crashed against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the destruction of that house was great. Again, we have here Jesus's version of, or excuse me, Luke's version of Jesus's great Sermon on the Mount. But we need to note again the continued theme from the preceding chapters, going all the way back here. Let's see here, going all the way back to verse number 5, where Jesus, or excuse, chapter number 5, actually chapter 4, really go all the way back to chapter 4. We see where Jesus is teaching, and he's teaching as one who taught differently than the rest. He taught with authority. He didn't teach quoting other rabbis, or he didn't teach and say, well, this is what needs to be understood because Rabbi so and so understood it this way. No, he's teaching on his own authority, and because of that, and because he's unwilling to conform to the traditions of men, well, that really sticks in the craw of these scribes and Pharisees who are mentioned within this text, that we've already seen them get up in arms about his forgiving of sins, which rightly so. Like, it makes sense that they would be upset that a man would try to forgive sins or would act as if he could forgive sins, but they missed everything. Should have led them to the understanding that he could do such a thing. But we also need to note that they did not appreciate the fact that his disciples did not fast. They don't appreciate the fact that his disciples are plucking grain on the Sabbath day. They don't appreciate the fact that he is doing good on the Sabbath day, healing on the Sabbath day. And all of this leads to verse number 11, where they are filled with rage and they start discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus. We know eventually they're going to try to kill Jesus. All this is done, again, because here is this conflict between the Messiah, who is coming to bring about the restoration of Israel, and here are the people who represent everything that's wrong with Israel at this point. Which, if they were in the crowd on the Sabbath, or excuse me, during this Sermon on the Mount, they wouldn't appreciate that either, because Jesus is calling upon his people to live greater lives than they had become comfortable living. And of course, this text includes everybody's favorite verse: do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. But I guess I messed up. I was probably supposed to stop reading there. I actually, really, in this whole Bible, all I need to do is read that one verse and we'd be good. Except that's not even everything that's in this verse. There's also forgiven, you will be forgiven. But then here's the applying principle, the principle we need to apply to this: that you will give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. But here it is: for with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. It's not saying that we can never judge. It's not saying we can never condemn, but we need to make sure that whatever we judge and condemn by, not only do we need to make sure that we're willing to be judged and condemned by the same, but I think even more so here, who is speaking, we need to make sure that we're judging, condemning according to God's authority, according to how God has spoken. That if we're going to call something sin, we need to make sure that God has spoken concerning it as sin. And if that's the way we operate, then we should not, and if we're being consistent in our own faith and in our own practice, then we need not worry about somebody coming at us with the exact same issue and saying, oh, well, you said that's sin, but why do you do it yourself? There's just so much that could be said here about Luke chapter 6 and so much more than we have time for today. But I do hope that through this reading, you have maybe picked up on a couple of things that you want to dig into a little more, that you'll be able to ponder and meditate on as you go throughout the rest of the day. And you have any questions or comments about what's found within these texts, whether it be Isaiah 24 or here in Luke chapter 6, please feel free to leave those comments or questions in the comment section, whether here on Facebook or on the YouTube channel. And we'd love to discuss those with you. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope that you have a great rest of this, at least in Cleveland, Tennessee. It's a beautiful Monday. Hope you get to enjoy it. And may God bless you, and look forward to seeing you in the morning for another reading from God's word. We'll be in Luke chapter 7, and we'll also be in Isaiah chapter 25. Hope to see you then. Take care. God bless.